Good evening and welcome to Spooky Tales with Steve the Cat, PBDC TV's Halloween headquarters for horror movies. I'm your host, Steve the Cat. Tonight we're digging into a couple of sequels, specifically sequels to films we have discussed on this program before. I know, last week I said we will be doing a found footage exorcism film this week, but the Halloween schedule required us to make a couple of late changes. But don't worry, we will be reviewing that film after Halloween. I like that film, plus I've already written the review anyway. But for tonight, instead we're doing a sequel to an old classic, plus a sequel to a film I consider a modern classic. We'll get to all of that in a moment, but first we need to check in with our resident conspiracy expert, Crimson Meerkat, who has been dispatched to West Virginia by PBDC TV management in a brave effort to locate and rescue our missing friend Malcolm Fluffosaurus. Hey, Meerkat, this is Steve. Do you read us?
I read you 5 by 5, Steve. Yes, I say things like 5 by 5 now. Get over it. We are continuing our journey towards the haunted dark woods of the Appalachian Mountains, where my drone last detected traces of Malcolm's DNA before we lost our communication signal and it disappeared. We've not yet reached the forest, but we are making good time now that we have teamed up with Chip and Todd from the fraternity of Sigma Pikachu as local guides. Sigma Pikachu! Woo! Yes, woohoo! Oh, brother. Anyway, there have been a number of interesting developments this week.
That's good news. Well, I assume it's good news. Is it good news?
I was able to reposition one of the Steve the Cat observation satellites in orbit around the moon, to do a long-distance scan of the area, and we detected a distress signal from my drone. It was too weak to interpret, but we were able to get a location and dispatch another drone to find it. Our second drone was able to locate the first drone and upload the contents of the signal, but ironically, something then happened to destroy the second drone.
Yeah, I saw that in the opener. What exactly was that thing?
Oh, dude, we call him Herbert, because we used to have a frat brother named Herbert, who would eat anything. Anyway, Herbert lives in that cave near the haunted woods. I've got a score to settle with him. Please, Steve, I'm begging you, don't do it.
Right, gotcha. No, I'm not taking the bait this time around. So, what was in the distress signal that the drone uploaded?
Proof that Malcolm is still alive and well.
That's fantastic. Let's see it.
Okay, Steve, but I have to warn you, it's another one of Malcolm's music videos. I'll give the guy credit. He was able to somehow fashion an entire working DJ station out of items he found in the forest. The bad news is, well, it's still Malcolm doing the rapping. Here, hang on, let me hit play. Here we go.
Well, I was in for 10 years of hard labor, just wandering the countryside and looking for a job when I roll up on the town of P.H.A. And up rolls a shepherd, kind of looking like a slob, and he says, I've got a problem with a lion, and I was hoping maybe you could help me out. So I told him that I know these times are trying. Then I jumped up on a boulder and I gave the world a shout. I said, my name is Hercules, and I'm looking for adventure and I want to do some good. So I'm headed to the woods to kill the lion. But the shepherd shook his head and told me I misunderstood. He said the lion is a friend and he'd never do me wrong. He's always got my back and he always treats me well. But my friend the lion has a problem. I can't stand to be around him because he's got an awful smell. He said, I know it's strange, and your mind may change, because I want you to give that cat a bath. Well, I must admit that I was kind of rattled. It was the strangest thing I'd ever seen. My life had always been about the battles, and I didn't know a thing about kitty cat hygiene, so I pondered and I planned and I conspired, and I came up with a plan that couldn't fail. Then I lured the lion to the river, got behind him and I grabbed him by the tail. I said, I know it's strange, and your tail's in pain, but I need to throw you in the bath. So when I swung him by the tail towards the river, it was the scariest thing I ever saw, because the way he spun around gave me a shiver. Then he stretched his legs and grabbed me with his claws. So the lion and I both fell in the water, and he clawed me and he bit me and he chewed. When the fight was over, it had been a slaughter, and I woke up later bleeding, bruised and nude. That lion beat me like I was a drum skin, but you know I am a man and have my pride, and somebody was bound to see me bare skinned, so I crept to town to find a place to hide. I slipped into the tailor's through the back door, and I looked through all the piles of cloth and felt. Then I found a pair of scissors in a drawer, and I sewed that cloth into a lion's belt. I said, I know it's strange, I wish things could change, but he passed away when I gave that cat a bath. Well, I wasn't feeling good about my deception, how I lied and told him let the lion drown. So I asked the local barkeep for directions, then I slumped my injured body out of town. I told everyone I met I killed the lion, and that I grabbed him by the ears and by the tooth. But the story that I told them wasn't canon, and I finally wrote the song to tell the truth. I say my plan was flawed, and I got bit and clawed, and completely failed to give that cat a bath. I had not foreseen the way cats view hygiene. Oh, don't you ever try to give a cat a bath.
Well, that wasn't good.
So for what it's worth, he's still alive. On the downside, his rapping does not seem to be getting any better.
Brother, you've got that right. Okay, you and Gwen continue on your way and see if you can find the downed drone. Maybe Malcolm is still there, or maybe he left some sort of clue as to where he's going. We'll continue to hold down the fort here. And don't forget about that process server that's following you. If he catches you and serves you a subpoena, it's all over. If that happens, Penelope will have PBDC TV's security chief stuff an electric motor up your butt, and you'll be clanging two little cymbals together until the end of time.
Charming as always, Steve. Your concern for my well-being is truly inspiring. I'm going to bed. Meerkat, out.
So it looks like our little conspiracy monkey is making good progress, although I suspect he's going to end up inside the belly of that big cave monster before this is all over. But that's a concern for another time. Right now, it's time for us to get down to the business of horror movies. Thank you so much for joining us. We're glad to see you, and we hope you have a great time. Now sit back and grab your popcorn, because here we go.
Afraid I'd find you here. Mike didn't need to ask me anymore. I enlisted for the duration.
Graveside service is about to begin.
Now, does that strike you a little strange, Riggs, that every single corpse in this entire graveyard's missing? Rich, we gotta get the people out of your house, man. The gas in there's gonna go. It's a dream.
It's only a dream.
No, it's not.
Let's get into our featured film review for this week. This week we are talking about a film called Phantasm 2. This is a sequel to Phantasm, which we reviewed last week. This, again, is a sci-fi horror film released in the year 1988, so the better part of 10 years after the original came out. Once again, directed and written by Don Coscarelli, who directed and wrote the original. And the cast includes James LeGros, Reggie Bannister, and Angus Scrimm. Reggie Bannister and Angus Scrimm returning to their roles from the first movie. James LeGros taking over the role of Mike, who was recast at the urging of the studio. Let's get into setting your expectations for this film. If you sit down to watch Phantasm 2, what you should expect is a much more coherent and literal sci-fi horror sequel that builds upon, and some would say better explains, the first film and keeps much of the supernatural feel. If you like the original Phantasm, you should like this film. If you like the Nightmare on Elm Street series, you might like this film as well. It's got a similar kind of flavor to it. So let's get into calibrating your sights to go into this film. This is the scale we like to use. On the far left side of the scale, we have very campy films, such as Jason X. On the far right side of the scale, we have very serious films, such as The Silence of the Lambs. As always, this scale is not an indicator of the quality of the film. This is an indicator of what your mindset needs to be going into the film in order to maximize your enjoyment of the film. Phantasm 2, kind of like its predecessor, more or less right down the middle. I've shifted this one ever so slightly over to the right, just because it's a little less surreal and a little less abstract than its predecessor, but certainly not a realistic film by any chance. But on the other hand, not played for laughs, apart from the occasional comic relief kind of bit. Before we go any farther, we need to do our vocabulary lesson for this week. This, of course, is the part of the show where we discuss new and innovative words and phrases in an effort to stay ahead of social media bots and algorithms that would otherwise try to ban our conversation. Social media bots and algorithms are always evolving, therefore our language must always evolve to stay ahead of them. 2 terms this week. Our first term is a review term, insteepenating. This goes back, I believe, to season 1. Insteepenating is a verb that refers to the process of converting a character into a liquid or slurry-like state through the utilization of a dissolving or corrosive agent, which is a very fancy way of saying insteepenating means dropping somebody into a vat of acid. Our second term is a new one, monosynopoken. Now, those of you who've watched the show before know that I speak flawless German, and this is another German term. It is German, meaning the action in a horror movie of immobilizing a character's hand by piercing it with a sharp object so deeply that the object emerges from the other side of the hand and fastens the hand to a surface such as a tabletop or wall. So in the many, many films you have seen where somebody uses a knife to staple somebody's hand to the tabletop, that is a monosynopoken. Please keep these terms in mind. They will become important later in the episode. So let's get into a summary of this film. In this film, we pick up immediately after the end of Phantasm with Mike and Reggie escaping an attack by the tall man's minions. And when I say immediately after, I mean immediately after. It picks up just seconds after the end of the final scene from Phantasm. Mike then, after the attack, spends 10 years in a psychiatric hospital, released about 10 years later. While in the hospital, Mike has developed a psychic bond with Liz, whose psychic gifts also connect her to the tall man. So after his release, Mike and Reggie set out on the road, traveling from town to town in search of the tall man. Yes, the 2 guys in muscle car going from town to town looking for supernatural kind of stuff. It is much like the TV show Supernatural, except Phantasm came first. Supernatural was partly inspired by Phantasm and the image of the 2 brothers in a muscle car going across country doing good and fighting evil. The tall man is traveling from town to town in this film, and he's stealing all of the corpses from graves and converting them into his reanimated minions. Now, his reanimated minions are called lurkers, and that transitions us to our villain profile. Our villain profile this week is about the lurkers. Here you see a picture of one right here. Last week we talked about the tall man, so we're not going to talk about him a second time. We're going to talk about his minions here. Lurkers belong to the class of reanimated dead human. Their special powers are, well, lurkers have been compacted to a smaller size to better cope with the high gravity of the tall man's home planet. This process also makes them much stronger than they were in life. So they've kind of been concentrated into a smaller volume, but they're stronger and more damage resistant. Signature weapon, well, they'll use various weapons, but primarily they seem to use their bare hands and teeth in attacks. And now a word from our benevolent overlords at PBDC TV, your nightly heartbeat of horror.
Hello, all you beautiful people. It's your boy, Slippy. And when I'm not gouging my face down in gallons and gallons of ice cream, I'm watching PBDC TV. Yes, the most amazing TV show out there. Now keep on watching. I love y'all. Mwah! Stay nasty.
Well, gentlemen, perhaps we wouldn't be where we are today if we hadn't said to ourselves, just go, 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 go for it.
This final score for this film, we're going to give it 3 paws out of 4.
Nuestra Señora de la Santa Muerte, Spanish for Our Lady of the Holy Death.
Out now!
Oh, that's sex and violence!
Hi everybody, I'm Akaw,
And I'm Priest Texas Diamond.
and we are Roots Bleed Red on Psycho Bunny Death Cult.
Aha!
In fact, humans have a very long history of eating each other.
So lock your doors, turn out your lights, and join us for Ghoul Radio.
This is Professor Edgar Fluffosaurus from Spooky Tales with Steve the Cat, and when I'm not hosting Monster Chat or knocking down small Japanese cities, I'm watching PBDC TV. Now back to the show.
So let's get into things that I liked about this film. Right off the bat, the film follows a conventional format and is far less surreal and confusing than its predecessor. Now, I am not saying that I did not like the first film. I liked the first film a good bit. And the first film was very surreal and somewhat confusing. I just like the fact that this film is not a duplicate of its predecessor. In terms of the story matter, it's very similar to the first movie, but the feel of the film is very different. So I appreciated the fact that they came at it from a different point of view and expressed the story in a different manner. This is the highest budget of any of the Phantasm films, leading to a feel of bigger is better that tries to one-up the previous film. This film was distributed by Universal Studios. Universal came to Don Coscarelli looking to set up a series of horror movies and thought Phantasm was a good candidate. So they threw $3 million at him to do this film. Now, $3 million was the smallest budget of any film Universal did that year, but it was the largest budget of any of the Phantasm movies, so make of that what you will. The story is straightforward, but reasonably interesting, and it's much easier to follow than the previous film. And again, it's not that I had an issue with the first film, it's just nice that you're not having two abstract films in a row that are difficult to interpret. You've got one abstract film that's difficult to interpret, followed up by one that's a lot more straightforward and helps to explain the previous film. Finally, you get pretty good special effects by Greg Nicotero and Robert Kurtzman. Greg Nicotero, of course, is a name you probably recognize from his work with The Walking Dead and other films. Let's talk about things that could have been better with this film. Not necessarily things I disliked with this film, but things that somebody might take issue with. Right off the bat, the role of Mike has been recast with a different actor. Now, this was done at the direction of Universal Studios. This was not a decision by the director. The director wanted to bring back the original actor who played Mike in Phantasm, but Universal wanted a more seasoned actor, somebody who was more of a working actor, so the role was recast. Similarly, this film is far more conventional and loses the dreamy, surreal nature of the first film, and again, this was done at the direction of Universal Studios. So, Universal wanted a Phantasm movie, but they wanted to replace the lead character, and they wanted a completely different feel. So it's your typical studio buys a property, changes everything, and then wonders why people didn't like it. The film does not feel like it has much of a purpose other than to explain the first film, imitate the first film on a much grander scale, and frankly to simply exist as the start of a Phantasm franchise for Universal Studios. At times this film feels more like an action movie than a horror movie, not all the time, but at times. And overall this feels like a money grab by the studio, which is more or less what it was. So let's get into Steve's scorecard for this film. We have kills, I counted 10. Bare breasts, 2 plus an asterisk. You know what the asterisk means. That means live actress playing a dead body. We are not going to count that, but we do make mention of it. Jiffy poppings, I counted 2. Noggin augerings, again I counted 2. Geyserings, counted 2 once again. Digging clonkings, hitting somebody in the head with a shovel. Yes, that happens. There is 1. Tree fellings. Someone releases the woodsman in this film, which is a polite way of saying somebody takes a chainsaw to somebody else. There's 1 of those in this film. Monosympokins. There is 1. And finally, insteepenatings. There is 1 inside-out reverse insteepenation. What does that mean? That means instead of somebody being dropped into a vat of acid, the acid is injected to their body and they are dissolved from the inside out. But with your viewing of Phantasm 2, you also get some bonus features, such as opening exposition a go-go. The first 5, 10, 15 minutes of this film seems like they're dedicated exclusively to explaining the explaining the first film, and then explaining what has occurred between the first film and now. So they do a very thorough job of setting the table in this film. You get dwarf in the cabinet action. You get house exploding action. In fact, you get house exploding action twice in this film. Now, I have not watched this film enough times to really look at the details and decide if they actually blew up 2 different prop houses or if they just blew up one house and used it twice in the film, shot from different angles. My suspicion is that they only blew up the one house and shot it from many different angles and just rolled it into the movie in 2 different locations, but I could be wrong. You get the return of the sexiest muscle car in horror films. Yes, the 71 Hemi Cuda is back in this film. You get zombie apocalypse level hardware and weaponry. Reggie and Mike are not kidding around in this film. They are armed to the teeth, and not just with firearms. You have flamethrowers, you have drills, you have chainsaws. They are armed for bear in this film. You get tire squeal on gravel action. This is one of my pet peeves. Folks, tires don't make squealing sounds when you drive on an unpaved road. They don't squeal when you spin the wheels on gravel. There's a very distinctive sound that tires make when they spin on gravel, and I don't understand why Foley artists don't use it, because it would make more sense and it's every bit as interesting as tire squeal, but maybe that's all they have available to them in their library of sounds. You get embalming action. You get 4-barrel shotgun action. Yes, Reggie creates a 4-barrel shotgun at the beginning of this film, and it becomes kind of his iconic weapon throughout this film. And I have also seen Phantasm 3. He carries it in Phantasm 3 as well. I have not yet watched Phantasm 4 and 5. They're on my to-do list, but not gotten to them yet, so I'm going to assume he carries it in those films as well, but I don't know that for a fact. You get chainsaw duel action. Yes, you get a duel between Reggie and one of the tall man's minions fighting with chainsaws. So let's get to Steve's final score for this film. I'm going to give it 2.5 paws out of 4. I'm going to say this is a coherent, well-executed, but ultimately unnecessary sequel that loses much of the flavor of its predecessor and ultimately feels more like an action film than a horror film. Now, I didn't dislike the film. I liked the film. It's just not the greatest thing I've ever seen. It just doesn't seem to have a whole lot of point to it other than to be a bigger, more over-the-top version of its predecessor. Anyway, that is Steve's final score for Phantasm 2, and that concludes our featured film review for this week.
It's been 2 years since the controversial release of the Hell House documentary, and many of us still have questions.
Where are you headed, sweetie?
The Abaddon Hotel.
I want to know what happened just as much as anyone else. Probably more.
Oh my god!
What?
Oh.
What? Keep it together. Just keep it together. I found tapes.
What?
All right, Abaddon Hotel, from construction to completion.
They're saying this place is haunted. Oh, come on, Molly. Don't tell me you believe in ghosts.
If I say drop whatever you're doing and head for the exit, you do exactly that.
Sorry. I'll go now.
Getting in isn't the problem. It's finding our way to the basement and finding our way out.
We're stuck in the Abaddon Hotel. Can you please help us, please?
Yes, we have you checked in for October 8th.
We've reached the end of this episode of Spooky Tales with Steve the Cat, but before we go, as is our tradition, we're going to take just a couple of minutes to talk about some other stuff Steve watched this week. This week we are talking about this film called Hell House LLC Part 2. I found this on Shudder. Now this does appear on other services intermittently. I have not seen it on any other services at the moment as I'm recording this, but it is available on Shudder, as is Part 3 of this series. This, of course, is a 2018 sequel to 2015's Hell House LLC, which, if you are a fan of this show, you know that I consider one of the best horror movies ever made and quite possibly the best found footage film of all time. This story features a morning news interview with a panel discussing the original Hell House LLC disaster and the resulting documentary, which was released 2 years earlier. Days later, after this panel breaks up, a group of journalists and 2 of the panel members break back into the Abaddon Hotel to investigate. What they find sheds more light on the mystery of the original Hell House, but can they get back out of the hotel? That, of course, is the question. So, what's the bottom line on this film? Well, it provides a lot more background information into the who and why behind earlier events at the Abaddon Hotel. You're either going to like that or you're not. The original Hell House LLC gave you enough clues, at least, to the who and why that you at least knew there was a story behind everything that was going on, but the original movie was far more concerned with the day-to-day events going on and generating the scares. This film is more interested in developing the backstory, or at least shows more interest in developing the backstory than the first film. The film has, unfortunately, much of the feel of a remake kind of sequel. It feels a lot like the original, and in some ways it feels almost like just a remake of the original. Not entirely, but it's not as original as you would like from a sequel. The film does feature many scares, and they are very well done, but they are not as effective as the first film. Now, that is still pretty high praise. Exceeding the bar of the first film is something that few films would be able to do. The first film is just scary as everything. So the fact that this film doesn't live up to the scares of the first film, not necessarily a criticism, but be aware, if you've seen the first film, you're probably not going to be quite as jumpy watching this one as you were watching the first. Overall, this is an above-average film, but far short of the standards set by the first film. That's as much because of the superiority of the first film as opposed to the issues of this film. This is not a bad film viewed in a vacuum. It's just not nearly as good as its predecessor. Now, it is worth watching if you are a fan of the original Hell House LLC. I will say this, though. Do not attempt to watch this film without first watching Hell House LLC, otherwise you will be completely lost. If you've not watched the original film and you just decide for whatever reason to jump directly into the sequel, you might enjoy it, but odds are you're going to be very lost as to what's going on. You're going to appreciate it a lot more if you watch Hell House LLC first. In fact, if you watch them back to back, all as one long film, that's probably even better. So, that is Hell House LLC, and that is other stuff Steve watched this week. That brings us to the end of this episode of Spooky Tales with Steve the Cat. Thank you so much for joining us. We had a lot of fun putting this episode together. We hope you enjoyed it as well. Of course, we always love to hear from you, so feel free to sound off in the comments about your favorite Phantasm moments, or your favorite horror sequels, or anything else that comes to mind. As always, if you did enjoy the show, please give us a like and a share. The best thing you can do to help us out is to share this video. If you want to stay up to speed on our latest videos and other goings-on, you can follow us and subscribe on social media. You can find us on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, Rumble, and Facebook. Spooky Tales with Steve the Cat is available exclusively through PBDC TV, your nightly heartbeat of horror. If you're interested in horror movies, true crime, creepy history, or unexplained events, we're sure to have a show for you. You can find us at PsychoBunnyDC.com, and we're also on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, and Rumble. We also have a 100% Zuckerberg-free Discord site. If you would like to check it out, just head on over to PsychoBunnyDC.com and click the link for an invitation. Next week, we start our 2-week-long celebration with the first of 2 special episodes, so you won't want to miss out. We hope to see you then, but in the meantime, everyone have a great week and stay safe. We'll see you again soon. Good night, everybody.